to expect the wealthy to magnanimously turn around and give us back some of the wealth and some of the productive output that we have created, sheerly because they're kind people, is stupid. It's never going to work. Charity is no adequate substitute to redistributive policies. My hope is to simply wait it out. Because eventually, when the cultural forces shift, it was really bad when Trump first became president. It was really bad between 2023, the end of 2023, 2024, and 2025. The reason for why it was really bad was because the overall culture had shifted dramatically to the right. Since then, woke has made a comeback in a fairly meaningful capacity. And that's part of the reason why, since woke has made somewhat of a comeback, people are a little bit more open-minded to the things that I'm advocating for, to the things that I push for. They're a little bit more curious about it. Okay? Woke 2.0 has been on the come up. Obviously, none of this has anything to do with normies in the real world. By the way, most people in the real world like me and have nothing to do. We're talking specifically about the internet. It has a tendency to impact the normie sphere as well. But for the most part, what we're talking about is like Twitch streams, YouTube, commentary sphere, that kind of shit. One of the greatest examples of this is the treatment that I received, the treatment that a lot of people who are pro-Palestine received for the first 2 years. Being inundated with an endless barrage of ridiculous smears, like calling me a terrorist and having no line of defense from my peers. None of them came out and were like, "Hey, this is really racist. We should stop this." Like woke 1.0, that shit would not have slided. They would have never let that slide. Like if woke 1.0 in like 2020, if a bunch of prominent Twitch streamers were playing, slided. Woke 1.0, if a bunch of prominent Twitch streamers were fucking turning around playing a game called like Twitch Streamer or Terrorist, where they had like prominent Muslim, Arab, pro-Palestine Twitch streamers, and they were being compared to like Osama bin Laden, everybody else in the community would have been like, this is acceptable. What are you doing? Yeah, they'd get lit up on Twitter. Twitter is very different now. Twitter is very right-wing. That obviously has the capacity to change people's perception of like what is permissible, what is acceptable. It sucks, but that's how it works. But yeah, there is definitely an endless amount of extremely online losers who spend every waking moment on the internet, and they spend a good deal of time just trying to make people's life a living hell. The only thing that they respond to, because they're not like they don't have like a lot of sound political points of view. Like they don't have like a firmly established political point of view at all. And they just simply lean into like vibes in general. And because they do that, when the vibes are right-wing, when they see a lot of like right-wing brigaded comment sections, they think, oh, this is normal. This is what like the majority believes. This is what the cool kids believe. And that's how they establish their political point of view, their political worldview. But those people are very malleable. Those people have not, they have not committed to a political worldview. They're just going along with what they think the vibes are. It's actually that easy. Which is part of the reason why, as I'm saying over and over again, like a lot of these people, many of you have found yourself in the alt-right pipeline back in the day for this exact same reason. You probably found yourself in the alt-right pipeline for this exact same reason. You probably watched like Joe Rogan, then you watched that Ben Shapiro video, and you were like, oh, these guys are like owning the libtards. It's awesome. And before you knew it, you were, more and more invested in the right-wing sphere. And it took a lot for something to snap you out of it. But that was like the Gamergate era. That never really went away. That agitative propaganda on the right still exists. The algorithm still very much favors reactionary right-wing commentary. It's not a secret, especially on platforms like YouTube, for example, and Twitter plays a big role in this as well. So for many of you, I was the guy who snapped you out of it. Or eventually, I played a role in your awakening, in your development, in your political development. So I obviously am going to keep doing what I'm doing to varying degrees of success, but we are there. We're definitely there. I think the broader cultural forces are shifting in our direction once again. The pendulum is swinging back. And obviously, it's important for all of us to maintain some sort of posture to show people that this kind of attitude is unacceptable. The reactionary point of view is unacceptable. To tell people to not be bigoted. Of course, not in a way where it's like cynical, hollow weaponization of like identity politics as it was in Woke 1.0 from a position of like moral superiority. That was one of the worst aspects of Woke 1.0. I was very critical of that at the time as well. You know, in Woke 2.0, I think we can both have fun and be woke and you know, call out bad behavior. But yeah, when you see like normies or people who are politically uninitiated develop some kind of like reactionary point of view, don't feel discouraged by that. Don't get upset by that. For the apolitical normies or for the apolitical people on the internet, they don't have a well-established, developed point of view. They don't have a political perspective. They don't have the political education. They don't have class consciousness. Many of them are children anyway. And children are at the mercy of the masses. If they see a brigaded comment section leaning in a reactionary perspective, they think, oh, this is cool. This is what people are into. Eventually, they will grow out of it. They will have an experience in their life, as many right-wingers do, where either they will find themselves at odds with the right-wing movement or a loved one will be in the crosshairs of a right-wing policy. And that's when they realize, oh, I need to develop empathy for others. Some never do. Obviously, there's a level of intelligence required for this. There's a level of educational attainment required to get there for many. That's part of the reason why the biggest gap in this country politically is not even around how much money someone makes, but what their level of education is. I believe it's like 60 to 70% leaning in the Democratic Party's direction when you have a college degree or above. The highest likelihood that you will vote for the Democratic Party in this country as a demographic is if you have a degree higher than a Bachelor of Arts or Sciences. Like if you have a graduate degree or a master's degree, then it's like you're almost 100% likely to. It's the highest likelihood that you will be a Democratic Party voter. There's definitely a huge vibe shift taking place. There's definitely a huge vibe shift taking place right now. And of course, we've always been there. We've been steadfast in our advocacy here in this little corner of the internet. And I will continue doing that. So I will always be open-minded and charitable to those who have gone through their own journey and arrived at this destination. I will welcome them with open arms, and I will always be there to help educate them. One of my political science professors claims this was due to Bill Clinton abandoning the rural working class. How true do you think that is? It's 100% true. So there was an educational attainment change that took place because back in the day, if you went to college, you were a high income earner. The Republican Party had the vibes of like a country club. Very wealthy people, elitist people were oftentimes, more often than not, Republican, but the overwhelming majority of the blue collar working class were Democrats. Now, this shift actually started in the Nixon era as well. Vietnam, hard hat wearers, like the aesthetics of trying to tap in to the working class. And it obviously accelerated with the Reagan era, culture wars, and you know, getting the working class on board with tax cuts and anti-union initiatives, anti-union legislation. But yes, Bill Clinton and NAFTA was the final blow. When those jobs dried up, when those labor unions died out, There was no longer a working class movement that was feeding into the base for the Democratic Party. Political polarization has taken on a very different shape in the United States of America in 2026 in comparison to where it was in the past. That political polarization has been designed around wedge issues. Shout out to Newt Gingrich for this. This is, again, a post-Reagan, first started in the Nixon era, but certainly became the prominent fixture of American politics in the Reagan era, culture wars and wedge issues, where both parties would identify themselves as being in favor of certain values. And this was this designed a wedge between the Republican Party and the things that they advocate for, which is like, anti-abortion, pro-Christianity, pro-small business, fake bullshit, right? And tax cuts and deregulation, right? And the Democratic Party was in opposition to those things, progress, to varying degrees. And also the Democratic Party, I guess, had more ideological diversity about, trade policy and trade protectionism and things of that nature. But it became a much more neoliberal, anti-welfare state party with Bill Clinton, and a free trade party with Bill Clinton. So that established somewhat of a uniparty approach to international trade policy. That established a neoliberal uniparty approach to many of the solutions to the existing problems that people were experiencing. That's precisely the reason why the Democrats since the 90s have barely been able to launch any kind of serious socialization initiatives in the field of healthcare, because they're backed by the same corporate entities, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, and many others. So there's a uniparty in Washington, D.C. Both parties align. There's consensus politics in Washington, D.C. between Democrats and Republicans on keeping healthcare private. Democrats want to fund it more with subsidies. Republicans want to take those subsidies away. But ultimately, they're aligned and have arrived at a consensus that it should still remain privatized. There's obviously a uniparty consensus politics on American foreign policy. This was post-2001, global war on terror. That was the last bastion of the anti-war liberalism movement. There were a lot of critics of George W. Bush. Obama killed that, right? Anti-war liberalism died with Barack Obama. Anti-free trade protectionist Democrats died with Bill Clinton. Pro-welfare state liberalism died with Bill Clinton. And anti-war liberalism died with Barack Obama. So what you're saying is the Democratic Party actively destroyed itself. Yes, it did. 100%. But fear not. We are currently moving into a different epoch, a different phase of American politics, where we are restoring, maybe even going further beyond the New Deal era of governance. That is definitely where at least we are trying to move the Democratic Party by force in the direction of less of a focus on culture war narratives and more of a focus on hardline economic improvements, class struggle, centering the working class at the heart of our policies. We will, of course, it is, of course, necessary to go further beyond New Deal democracy, New Deal Democrats, in order to ensure that this is a resilient movement. But that is, hopefully, if we are successful, that is where we will move in the direction of socialism, restoring a manufacturing base in the United States of America, if it's even permissible, even if it's even possible. Not only onshoring jobs, onshoring manufacturing, but also making sure that those onshored manufacturing opportunities are not simply increasing economic activity, but it's also bringing back good jobs for people with good benefits, union jobs, creating an environment where there is more political participation from the working class that has been left behind in this country. Because the last 3 decades, the last 4 decades of American politics has been dominated by Ronald Reagan, by Reaganite neoliberalism. Every subsequent Democrat, every Democrat that has come after Ronald Reagan has also been a neoliberal. And yes, this includes Barack Obama as well. So it is important for us at the peak of the contradictions worsening to help people come to terms with their class position and demand an alternative. Was NAFTA a good thing? No. What are you, crazy? We have to do away with a culture war first policy platform that the Democratic Party has leaned heavily into because of the consensus politics that I just mentioned. Democrats need to completely flip the script and go balls to the wall and very aggressive on hardline economic progress, on policies of socialization, hopefully policies of nationalization down the line, while simultaneously still mounting a significant defense for marginalized identities and marginalized communities, but never allowing the Republicans to frame the conversation around some of these like edge cases that are commonplace and perfectly normal, but will become a big issue if we allow the Republicans to center the conversation around these issues. You know, high school transgender athletes participating in high school competitions. This is not a real issue. This is not an issue that impacts any American in a significant manner, right? It is a clearly, purposefully concocted narrative that was focus tested by the Republicans in an effort to make that the key fixture of American politics. Well, Donald Trump did it. He banned transgender athletes. Did that help you? Do you feel better now? Do you feel like your life is improved in any significant manner? Of course not, because it was always bullshit. It was always a distraction, a very violent one for the tiny minority of transgender people. It's horrible for them, but it's not good for you. So I always say we have to have a vision in the affirmative, a clear, identifiable agenda that people can sink their teeth into, an agenda that centers the working class, an agenda that seeks to improve people's material conditions, an agenda that revolves around expanding the existing social safety nets in very meaningful ways, an agenda that tries to reset the way that the American politics have consistently, since the Reagan era, demanded less and less from the wealthy and more from the working stiff, the average Joe. We have to, it's topsy-turvy in this goddamn country and in many other Western capitalist liberal democracies at this point. That is precisely the reason why there has been tremendous wealth consolidation, specifically in the stock market. The bottom 50% of wealth in this country own 1% of the stock market. The top 10% own 90%. The top 10% of wealth in this country own 90% of the stock market. That's where all of our economic activity is, right? That's everything now. That's everything. And it's built around a hope and a dream. It's not built around market fundamentals any longer, if it ever was. Finance capitalism has destroyed that. We don't have the widget factory any longer. We have no outputs to look at, no KPIs, just vibes. Tech stocks, AI, the same $100 billion exchanging hands between NVIDIA and OpenAI and ChatGPT and all these other companies, right? All of that money is circulating, but it never touches your pockets. It never improves your financial situation. Remember, I'm going to repeat this one more time. This fact is insane. The bottom 50% of wealth in this country own 1% of the stock market. 1%. The top 10% of wealth, on the other hand, own 90% of the stock market, with the overwhelming majority of that ownership coming from the top 1%. So even the multimillionaires are getting fucked over in this country with the amount of unfathomable wealth consolidation Wealth consolidation and power consolidation is in the hands of fewer and fewer people. Okay? This cannot go on. This is a completely busted system. This avarice, this endless appetite for wealth and power consolidation is never going to stop unless we make it stop, unless we turn it around. It's ridiculous to expect the wealthy to magnanimously turn around and give us back some of the wealth and some of the productive output that we have created sheerly because they're kind people is stupid. It's never going to work. Charity is no adequate substitute to redistributive policies. That we know. That we have seen for the last couple of decades. This is incredible. The wealthiest 0.00001% of Americans now hold a record 12% of U.S. national income. It's gotten to a point where all of the wealth that we are generating, all the wealth that we are creating, all the value that we're creating is staying in the hands of not even like the top 10%, not even the top 1%. It's the 1% of the 1%. Isn't that insane? It's actually incredible because it's worse than the Gilded Age. It's worse than the Roaring 20s. That's how bad wealth disparity has gotten. But of course, technology has allowed us to have very different experiences, so we can do a lot more with a lot less relative wealth. So the average person now in 2026 obviously is far wealthier than the average person in 1926, right? Although the wealth disparity and the power disparity has grown tremendously, the average person is not starving as they did in the Great Depression. Okay? I don't mean to backtrack, but why did you talk about the trans issue in sports like it wasn't important? I could be misunderstanding. No, I did not say that it wasn't important. I said it is important. It's important for every trans person because it's a sequence of events that are carefully concocted to basically erase trans people. But trans people at the end of the day are not even 1% of the population. So from the perspective of 99% of Americans, what happens to trans people in either direction doesn't impact them at all, right? So this isn't a way to say, don't talk about trans issues at all. This is simply a way for me to explain to the average person that all of this harm that Republicans are engaging in, they're doing to dupe you. They're hyper-focusing your entire political interest in 1% of the population. It's ridiculous. That's why I always say to the Republicans that, make their way into this community, do you feel better? Donald Trump put trans people and trans existence in the crosshairs and took the initiative and made it illegal for the 49 transgender athletes to participate in NCAA competitions. Did that improve your life? It did not. It's not about dismissing the trans issue. It's more so saying that we must always maintain a defensive posture for all identities, for all members of the working class, which includes trans people, black people, undocumented migrants. However, we can also call out the fact that this is being weaponized as a distraction by the Republicans who are not improving your living conditions. Here, I'll give you another example. I mean, this is something that is incredible. I mean, all those liberals who said vibe session. Look at this. Grocery shopping, putting a strain on family budgets. Now, if you remember, I've talked about this in the past, sometimes jokingly as the bread theory. Marat loves bringing that up. The price of bread, as long as it is relatively stable, as long as it is relatively affordable and accessible, the price of food, the price of groceries, most Americans are not going to revolt as long as they can get their treats. Something changed. COVID happened. Our just-in-time manufacturing supply lines were unbelievably fragile. They broke apart. They fractured. It was food and groceries became less accessible, more expensive. We saw a tremendous spike in the prices of groceries, also known as inflation. But that price did not go down when the supply lines opened up. When the global supply chain issues were solved, prices kept going up and up and up, what is known as greedflation. And at the time, when we on the left called this out as greedflation, that could only take shape because of the corporate consolidation. This can only happen when the Western liberal capitalist markets only have a handful of companies that own everything, by the way. If there was true market competition in the way that capitalism is intended to create a free market, the freer the markets, the freer the people, they say. Well, we, of course, believe that this is the most honest expression of capitalism. Monopolization is the most honest expression of capitalism. That is precisely what companies try to do. That's the greatest market advantage you can have when you're the sole provider of goods, when you can set the price. What we have right now is an oligopolistic structure. Wealth consolidation and corporate consolidation has made it so that price leadership is super easy. Price fixing, remember, is illegal, right? You can't go into a cigar smoke-filled back room and get together and operate a cartel unless you're OPEC. You can't do that. You can't set a price and then everybody else agrees with you. That's illegal, technically. But what you can do is a concept that is perfectly legal. It's called price leadership. Price fixing is illegal. Price leadership is perfectly legal. So I'll give you one example. Airlines. In the Reagan era, there were hundreds of different airlines in many different markets. Nowadays, there's like one or two in certain smaller markets and 4 or 5 if you're lucky. Not a lot of competition there. If there were 200 different alternatives in the airliner industry, right, it would be a lot more difficult for one company to decide we're actually going to charge for your luggage. Because other companies that don't charge for the luggage would then get away with being a cheaper alternative. A less costly alternative. People would just go to the company that's not charging you for your luggage. But when there's only 1 or 2 companies and one airliner decides to charge for your luggage, all of the other airliners also follow suit. This is known as price leadership. Okay? Yes, another concept is price fixing is illegal, price leadership is legal, tax evasion is illegal, tax avoidance is legal. And for the record, there is still a lot of price fixing that goes on. Make no mistake. But we don't really have a regulatory body that is invested in tackling these issues any longer. So you get the short end of the stick. You as the consumer, you as the worker, don't get all of the value that you provide, don't get all the value you generate, and you as the consumer then go home and are over by the same corporations. They raise your prices, and there's nothing you can do about it. What are you going to do? You're not going to survive without eating eggs. This is price leadership, greedflation. Companies realized that people had the capacity to pay more for the same goods, and they kept prices relatively high. Prices never went down. Prices adjusted a little bit. Inflation was coming under control, but this right here, this 2021 till 2023 spike was negative real wage growth. If your groceries are more expensive, but your wages don't go up, if you only get a 1% increase in your wages, let's say, or 5% increase in your wages, but the grocery prices went up 30%, that means you are now 25% poorer than you were from the year prior. That's a negative real wage loss. It was so much fun to have been totally right about the vibe session being totally wrong. It doesn't matter. We're always right, but it doesn't matter because nobody listens to us when we're right, because we're right too early, Michael. If you're right too early, look, this is what I've learned in my last, 13 years of being a political commentator who's a socialist, who's an anti-imperialist. Being right too early doesn't do shit. Nobody ever goes, you know what? This guy was saying this all along. Maybe he was right. Maybe I should listen to him this time around. You know what they do? The resentment carries. They'll agree with you, but they'll still resent you because they never forget how you made them feel. Same with Palestine. Same with Vibe Session being totally wrong. Same with all of the things that we said about Kamala Harris's campaign falling apart and how her loss was likely, that this was a major gamble. None of those liberals, even ones who actually recognize that we were right, have turned around and been like, maybe we should listen to you this time around. Maybe we should listen to you this time around. No, that doesn't happen. They just remember you as the guy who delivered them the bad news from the start. The bad news that they did not want to hear. The bad news that made them feel bad. And instead of feeling bad, they wanted to feel good. And to feel good, what did they do? They succumbed to their biases. They sought information that would agree with them. They sought out outlets that would tell them, no, Kamala Harris is doing amazing. She's going to win for sure. Don't listen to these radical wokes to the Kamala Harris left. They're all they all hate Israel because they're Jews. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to those people. It actually makes perfect sense for the vice presidential debate to start off with, will you sign off on a nuclear first strike against Iran? That's perfectly normal. That's what they said. And they never took accountability over their actions. Look at Matt Iglesias. He's a great example of this. One of the biggest entitled, smug elitist that was professionally wrong the entire time. Was there any accountability for any of the advisors? No. They're still fighting that exact same battle. But this was, for the overwhelming majority of Americans, negative real wage. This was a negative real wage growth. This is where people's salaries did not catch up to people's expenses. So they literally were poorer year over year. And what's supposed to happen? What's supposed to happen is year over year, the amount of money you make is supposed to go up. You're no longer a 5-year experienced employee. You're now a 6-year experienced employee. You have an extra year under your belt. Your wages are supposed to go up. You're now more experienced. You're now more productive. But if the cost of goods is going up, and this is just the groceries and shit, we haven't even got, that is just the groceries. This is the one line that's supposed to be relatively stable no matter what. That's the last bastion of defense. When this falls apart, when that spikes, the working class start getting real mad for good reason. We're not even talking about housing right now. We're not even talking about healthcare. Housing, healthcare, and education, the 3 key necessities for upward social mobility and for survival. Housing and healthcare have inelastic demand. And yet, there is, and I'm going to bring this back to the thing that I was talking about already, uniparty consensus in Washington, D.C. Uniparty consensus on keeping housing private no matter what for profiteers as a speculative asset. And there is uniparty consensus on healthcare in the same exact way. There are differing opinions in the Hill for what Democrats want to do. They want to subsidize it endlessly, but they want to still keep it private. That is what we have to change. But I do think that the socioeconomic conditions have worsened to such a degree that people are now more and more aware of this game. They at least feel in their hearts this resentment, this unease. They recognize that something is not right. So it's important for us as socialists to explain to them the design of this machine that fucks them over, that stiffs workers at the behest of bosses. That's what we have to do. And it's not easy because a lot of people don't want to experience any change whatsoever, even when shit's really messed up. Americans look at a problem and will be the first to tell you that the solution to the problem is the same problem, more of it. To demand more of the same reasons why the problem persists. Look at gun violence in this country. Gun violence is a great example of this issue. Okay? The average American looks at gun violence and says, we have too much of it. We have to put a stop to it. What are we to do? The solution from the right is more guns. Oh, you want to stop school shootings? Arm the teachers. How is that going to stop school shootings? It's going to make it more likely to have school shootings. And the same issue persists for capitalism in general. A lot of Americans are deluded into thinking. They've been deluded into thinking. They're blinded by ideology. They're blinded by dogmatic pro-capitalist thought into believing that the solution to capitalism and all of its failures is more capitalism. There are plenty of Americans who believe this. That's why they say, no. It's because free markets have never been tried. The freer the market, the freer the people. Free markets have never been tried. Real capitalism has never been tried. Well, we say real capitalism has been tried. You're experiencing it right now. This is a more real version of capitalism than one that your parents experienced when there was a top marginal tax rate of 92%. That was a less real version of capitalism. This is a real version of capitalism. Your grandparents did not experience a real version of capitalism when they were still benefiting from the GI Bill, when they were still eating good off of the mass industrialization that took place, the centralized economy that had to take shape because of the war efforts, and the residual benefits that they experienced from that after in the post-war economy. They never saw real capitalism. We're seeing it right now. And every day that goes by where wealth consolidation grows in the hands of lesser and lesser people, we get to experience a more real capitalism. It's that simple.